Well, good morning. It's good to see you today. I hope that you're doing well. I know we have quite a few people who are away from us this morning or watching online due to all the variety of wintertime illnesses that strike this time of year, but we also got a couple of our college kids back, and that's always nice. If you're visiting with us this morning, you're our honored guest. We're glad to have you, and we hope that your time here would help you come to know the love of God a little bit better after today than it was yesterday, right? That's why we gather together to worship and grow and learn. So I was watching a football game a couple months ago from one of the teams I really enjoy watching, and it was a fairly important game. It was against a rival, not the big rival, but against a different rival. And I was watching the game, and I sat down. It was pretty quickly that the other team scored a touchdown. Okay, and that's fine. You know, other teams score first all the time, especially with my teams. So it wasn't a huge deal. And then shortly after that, they scored again, 14-0. And I can be a pretty animated fan. I'm not crazy. I'm not that guy, but I can be a fairly animated fan in general. Okay, but on this specific occasion, even 14-0, pretty early on in the game, I was fine. I was still confident my team would win. I wasn't worried about it whatsoever. And then it was 21-0. And then they got the ball back and immediately fumbled. And I think they went into halftime like 28, maybe 31-0. And I just want to say, I was still cool, calm, and collected. I was confident. I was content. it didn't bother me all that much because I still had faith that my team was going to win. All right? And even after the second half, my team threw interceptions, dropped the ball. It still wasn't pretty for quite a long while. But I was fine. You want to know why I was so content? Why I was so confident? It was a rerun. Okay? It was a rerun. I had gotten a text on my phone 3 days prior that my team won. Okay? I knew that at the end of the game, my team was going to have more points than the other team. Okay? So while it might still not have been pretty to watch my team throw interceptions and drop the ball and get smacked around for 3 quarters, I knew that at least in those last 10, 15 minutes, my team was going to do really, really well. And I could sit there perfectly calm, and it didn't bother me to see how poorly they were playing at first because I knew that at the end, my team would be the winners, right? And you can probably already tell where we're going with that this morning. You know, we've been doing this minor prophet study now for, 3 months with a couple small interruptions along the way. This is our last one. Okay, and you might have thought that last week was going to be our finale for the minor prophets. I mean, it was the book of Malachi. Malachi is the last of the minor prophets. It's also the last book of the entire Old Testament. So you would have been fair to think that we were going to be done. And that was the original plan, was to do Malachi last. The thing is, I started studying Zechariah a couple weeks ago for last week's sermon and thought to myself, I have no idea what I'm going to say about this book. Okay? We talk about how we've oftentimes glossed over the minor prophets because they can be so culturally conditioned and they can be so over-the-top abstract, and we don't read them a whole lot. And I was getting to Zechariah, and I was reminded why. Because it was difficult. I was having a hard time deciding what I was going to say. In fact, I shared with a preacher friend that I was going to preach on Zechariah, and they're like, I'll be interested to see how you handle that one. And I found out a couple days later that it wasn't going to be super well, But it's through this series, I've tried to take these minor prophets and hone them down to maybe a singular point that you can take home. Obadiah was about pride. Haggai was about priorities and something like that. Zechariah is about 4 or 5 times longer than most of the other minor prophets. But the longer I studied this, the more I read it, the more I just spent extra time in this book over the last handful of weeks, the more it became clear and clear to me that Zechariah is a book of hope. That summarized down at the very end of it, this is simply a book of hope. And I hope that through these minor prophet series, you've seen some of the themes that continue to pop up over and over again. One of the major themes that we have seen time and again is the fact that God is going to bring justice on this world. That we see wrong things happening all the time, but God is going to make all things right. That innocent people who are neglected, who are abused, who suffer, they will be vindicated. They will be lifted up by God. Meanwhile, the abuser, the slave trafficker, the rapist, the warlord, those are all examples for minor prophets. They will be made to experience the pain that they so willingly inflicted on others. right? That is biblical justice. That is biblical righteousness. We forget that righteousness is not an arbitrary goal to which we strive. Righteousness, at least in the original language, was a relational term. It's about having a right action against or with another person, right? So often we think about justice and righteousness in this world today as, if you say bad words, God is going to send you to hell for eternity, okay? But that's not the kind of things that the minor prophets are dealing with, all right? They're talking about the big issue things. They're talking about the kind of things, I don't care if you're atheist, Buddhist, or Christian, there is evil in this world, right? And we want and desire and pray that God would deal with real evil in this world, right? And that's what so many of these minor prophets are talking about, that God is a perfect and good judge. And there is some hope in that theme. But with that, another common theme through the minor prophets is that these prophets will speak about what the other side of that judgment will look like, right? What the other side of that judgment will look like. A picture from God of what the end will be like for all of us. And I think really this is a gift of grace to let us know that God does in fact win and that all things will be made right. And because of that, when we face the trials in life, when we go through the fires, we can stand firm and calm and confident, like me in that football game, because we know that at the end, our team wins, right? That God wins, yeah. That all the evil that is done to you, that all the evil you wish you hadn't done yourself will be put away and things will be right because God wins. Good triumphs over evil. I think about, and that's just an image of hope that we get to have from these minor prophets. I think back to in college when I was in better shape, okay? And we would go hiking through the Smokies like every handful of weekends. Living in Nashville, we'd drive over and we'd go hiking. And the mountains are a lot different for an Indiana boy than the hiking I was used to, right? And so we'd be on the way, and then we'd be doing these mile-long treks back to some obscure waterfall, dumping off into the middle of nowhere. And we'd be walking, and then we'd sleep, and we'd walk some more, and our feet would be hurting, and it'd be not a lot of fun. It starts off fun, and it's fun at the end, but in between, there gets to be a moment where it's no longer fun, all right? And in those moments, one of my favorite things to do was talk to the people who had been there before. I want to hear from this upperclassman, maybe, about the waterfall we're going to see. I want to hear about how beautiful it is, how grand it is, how big it is. When I can set my sights on the beauty of the destination, it allows me to get through the hard times so much easier. I also remember doing something similar as a little kid. We were going to Disney World, and we drove. Right? And not a lot of fun for like a little kid to drive to Disney World. But we were going with another family, and this older girl would just be telling me about all the cool things that were there, and it helped the hardships of that journey, knowing where we were going. And I focus on that this morning. It's been a theme through many of the minor prophets, but I think Zechariah does one of the best at this. And so let's look at a couple of these examples. After talking about the future of God's redeeming work, we read at the beginning of Zechariah chapter 2, he says, "Then I looked up, and there before me was a man with a measuring line in his hand." So Zechariah's been preaching about this beautiful, perfect end that would be coming. And Zechariah says, "And then I looked up, and there before me was a man with a measuring line in his hand. I asked, 'Where are you going?' He answered me, 'To measure Jerusalem, to find out how wide and how long it is.' While the angel who was speaking to me was leaving, another angel came to meet him and said to him, 'Run, tell that young man, Jerusalem will be a city without walls, because of the great number of people and animals in it. And I myself will be a wall of fire around it, declares the Lord. And I will be its glory within.'" Okay, so some guy has been hearing Zechariah talk and preach about this beautiful future that was coming. And because these people are post-exile, because they've had their city, Jerusalem, destroyed, because they don't have a Messiah yet and know the full picture, Zechariah preaches to them about this in the way of a redeemed Israel, a rebuilt and restored and renewed Jerusalem, right? And so Zechariah is preaching about this, and somebody who's listening to him says, "Great." And he gets a measuring tape, and he starts running, and says, "I'm going to go figure out how big this place is going to be," right? And in fact, he's probably wanting to build a wall, because at this point in history, they hadn't rebuilt the wall, and they were getting attacked by neighbors a lot, and that was part of the suffering they were experiencing at this time. And so this man is probably going to go, all right, let's find out how big Jerusalem is if God's going to build it back, figure out how long this wall is. And an angel comes and tells him, hey, go tell him that ain't what we're talking about, all right? That isn't what it's going to be like. This new heavenly city will have no walls. In fact, it can't have walls because there are going to be so many people, and there's going to be so much blessing in this new city that it's going to be spilling out into the streets. You don't want to measure it because you can't measure it because it's going to be spilling out into the streets. And God himself is going to be the wall. That he will be a wall of fire around the city, that he'll be keeping all the danger out, that his power and manifested presence will be surrounding you so that nothing from the outside can ever hurt you again. And not only is he going to be on the outside of the city protecting you, he's going to be on the inside of the city blessing you. That he'll be the light, that his sheer presence in that moment will give them light and glory forever. Isn't that just a beautiful picture? It's a little abstract, because it's thousands of years old and written to a Middle Eastern culture, and that's not who you are, okay? But it's a beautiful picture of a heavenly home. It's a place of great abundance. It's a place of perfect community, wonderful community. It's a place with no threat of danger or despair. It's a place where God dwells with his people, where his sheer presence gives them glory and light for everyday living. It really is a beautiful picture. With that said, I think it's very easy for you and I to read Zechariah's depiction of heaven and think, it's a little vanilla, right? That seems a little too mild. I like the New Testament's version better. There's gold there, right? There's pearls, there's mansions. That's the version I like a little bit more, and I understand that. And those biblical examples and descriptions are there for us as well. But it's interesting. I think the reason this one doesn't appeal to us as much is because of how blessed and privileged we are. Can I say that? I think we're not as struck by this because we're so blessed to be safe. We already have great community. We already have great abundance. We already have great safety. I'm curious how this description would sound to the Israeli and Palestinian civilians right now. How they would receive this message from Zechariah. And their situation actually better describes the people that were experiencing this in the first place. The people he was actually talking to. To find out that there's going to be a wall of fire that would protect them. That there would be so much blessing that would be spilling out onto the streets with how wonderful and good it is. I wonder how this would sound to the children of Haiti. I wonder how this would sound to the children of Nairobi. Or even bring it a little closer to home, to the elderly person living in the dying off town in West Virginia, even. And, to have a home where there is community, abundance, safety, and glory. And I think that if we knew that this is what was waiting for us, don't you think that it would shape the way that you engaged everyday life, right? If you knew that everything was going to be okay, as bad as it gets right now, it would shape the way that you interact with the bad that happens on this daily basis. I think so. Like the football game. I'll come back to that illustration one more time. The sting from the trials they endure, it's limited because they see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? They see the light at the end of the tunnel so they can face the fires head on, knowing that they will come out the other side. Got one more depiction. I really like this one. 8 verses 4 through 6. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Once again, men and women of ripe old age will sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each of them with cane in hand because of their age. The city streets will be filled with boys and girls playing there. This is what the Lord Almighty says. It may seem marvelous to the remnant of this people at this time, but will it seem marvelous to me, declares the Lord Almighty? And the last little bit's kind of nice. It's like, that sounds like impossible to you, but it's not impossible for me, all right? I like this one because it kind of describes the kingdom of God presented as this beautiful day in the park. At least that's how I'm kind of like coming to this a little bit. It's presented almost as this beautiful day in the park. Old folk sitting in the sunshine, kids running and playing together. It's just this perfect, peaceable time where they're together. Now, in our reality, in our day and age right now, a trip to the park isn't always so bright and sunny, is it? I got 3 little kids. I'll tell you right now, if you ain't been to the park in a while, it's not always so bright and sunny. okay? Not just because of the occasional temper tantrum. In our world today, we have to worry about cars driving too fast right along the playgrounds, right? We have to worry about the fear. We have the fear of the potentially malicious adult who is there who might want to bring harm to your child. We worry about what bully they're going to encounter on the playground. We worry about the incidental boo-boos that'll happen when we fall off the slide, right? But here, in the new heavens, in the new earth, in the new Jerusalem, all worry and all fear are gone. All worry and all fear are gone. There is only joy and blessings that comes from living this life to its fullest, enjoying the blessings of God with no more fear of Satan, no more worry of sin, no more fear of chaos or anything like that. It is just the blessings and joy and peace of God. And remember, that Zechariah, this is written to a people who do not have that. They are struggling, they are starving, they are worried. They have no time for leisure or play, okay? Yet God promises that there will be a day when that is all that is required. And I think you can kind of see, can't you, how this constant offering of hope from Zechariah, or I guess I should say from God through Zechariah, would help. And he continues to offer them images of hope and redemption and victory that can frame their current frustrating experiences. Then there's another biblical illustration. I don't believe it's in Zechariah. It's in a handful of places, though, of a woman in labor. Of a woman in labor who experiences the great and terrible pains of childbirth, yes, but knowing the joy that comes on the other side of that, knowing the beauty in life that will come through the hardship, that makes it completely worth it in the end, right? And I think this is a liberating fact, folks. This is a liberating thing. I'll put it this way, to know that the worst thing that can happen to you today is also the best thing that can happen to you today, right? As a baptized believer, follower of Jesus, who has our eternity set in stone, the worst thing that can happen to you today is also the best thing that can happen to you today. You know, I don't preach on heaven a whole lot. And part of that is intentional. That is actually an intentional decision. I'm afraid that sometimes when we do that too much, we turn faith into a pie in the sky kind of thing. We tune out what God is doing in our lives right now. But in studying for this week, it really struck me that maybe I haven't preached on it enough. You know, there's been intentional decisions, but maybe I've also swung a little bit too far the other direction. Because we need this. We need this vision cast before us of what we are striving for. And that's what Zechariah is doing. He's offering us hope in the storm. But one of the cool things about Zechariah that you and I as modern-day Christians can be extra grateful for is the fact that he doesn't just talk about these prophecies of the final picture. He also gives us a lot of prophecies about a king who would come to lead his people into that peaceable kingdom. This is Zechariah 9 and 10. Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will take away the chariots from Ephraim and the war horses from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be broken. He will proclaim peace to the nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. Sound familiar? Maybe a little bit. The gospel writers tell us that this very passage was fulfilled by Jesus riding into Jerusalem on the colt of a donkey, being praised as Hosanna, right? Jesus was this one. God told his people hundreds of years prior that he would send a victorious and righteous king to lead them to glory and peace and in a messianic kingdom. And Jesus, he comes and he does exactly that. It's Jesus. It's always been Jesus, right? Jesus is the one who holds the keys. Jesus is the one who opens the door, who breaks the seal, who allows us to come from this to that, from the pain to the beautiful, to the rubble of Jerusalem, to a messianic city and a beautiful kingdom. But remind me, if you would, forgetful preacher, what happens a couple days after he rides on that donkey? Yeah? They kill him. how can this king, prophesied here by Zechariah, how can this king be victorious if they kill him? How can this king be chosen and ordained by God and yet still be murdered by his enemies? Well, Zechariah, he talks about that as well. Actually, a handful of places. I can't get through them all. Here's a little summary and verses if you'd like to look up later, and this is obviously always on YouTube. Zechariah tells us that this good shepherd will be rejected by his very sheep. That enemies will bring violence against the good shepherd and then scatter his sheep. Most of these are quoted in places in the Gospels. That 30 pieces of silver, specifically, will be paid to get rid of the good shepherd, and then it would be given to the potter. You remember that little tidbit too, that they sold it for potter's field, the money that they paid Judas. You know, it strikes me here, folks, that Jesus also had to endure our less than perfect kingdom. Right? The world we live in right now, I'll call it the less than perfect kingdom. Jesus also had to endure the broken, uncomfortable, messy life that you're living right now. You know, and what's so surprising about that is he already had the perfect one. He had the perfect kingdom. He was in heaven. He was untouchable. He had this glorious, perfect life and experience in heaven, and he gave it up to enter into our broken world. He gave it up to enter into our broken world. What's so beautiful about that, not just the willingness of God, which is huge, tells us so much about the character of God, but the fact that when he went from the perfect to the imperfect, it allowed the door to be open for you and I to go from the imperfect to the perfect, right? I'll say it one more time. When Jesus went from the perfect to the imperfect, it opened the door so that you and I could go from the imperfect to the perfect, right? That you and I could go the other way, from what is broken to what is whole. It's such a wonderful story, you know, and we just say, praise God for such a Savior who would go backwards so that we could go forwards, in a sense. But then the truth about this is, as we see here in Zechariah, we killed him. The gift was given, as so many people are remembering this time of year. The gift was given, and we rejected it. You know, even from the beginning, God knew that the rescue and the salvation of his creation would only come about through pain and loss. The salvation and the rescue of his creation would only come about through pain and loss. There are forces of evil at work in this world against the forces of good. We see that every day, right? And I don't want to over-spiritualize this, because people tend to do that sometimes. But there is a reality where there are forces of evil at work against the forces of good. And God knew that there would be a struggle against his good and perfect Messiah. And I think it's incredible that in this world, how we could be offered a picture of a perfect reality, of a perfect heaven filled with God's glory and love and peace and joy, and then we would fight against that to stay in our status quo of pain and misery, which is exactly what happened. You know, we like the prophecies of heaven, but when it actually is handed out to us through the Savior, when he actually gets close to us, we reject it. But what's even greater about this is the fact that God was not limited by our evil tendencies. Actually, through the brutal rejection and through the murder of Jesus, God made a way for people to see better his desire for peace and wholeness. This is 2 more verses from Zechariah. It's talking about after the shepherd is rejected, he says, "And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced," another little prediction there, "and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son." Excuse me, got trigger happy. "On that day, a foundation will be opened to the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from their sins," to cleanse them from sin and impurity. And this is the gospel according to Zechariah, if you will. Right? This is the gospel message, that we embrace the broken world that we live in. We have become agents of pain, but praise God that he was willing to enter into our world, to give himself up so that we could have access to a future that is filled with God and his virtue and his glory forever. And to kind of pull us back full circle, we can face this world head on. We can continue to pursue what is good in the face of such a strong evil. We can keep our heads held high because we know how the story ends. We had a Messiah come and open that door for us to get to that destination. And I don't know about you, but my soul longs for that place. It knows that this is not what it was made for. The environment that my soul lives in around on a regular basis in this world, the things I subject my soul to by the choices I make, it knows that this is not what it was made for. And it longs for that better, more full place where I will be reunited with loved ones, where my scars will be healed and covered for good, where there will only be happy tears. And I need to keep that image in my head if I'm going to get through the next day. You know what I mean? If I'm going to keep putting one foot in front of the other, if I'm going to keep facing the trials in life, I've got to keep that image in my head. And I am so thankful to God that He told me what to look for, that He told me what I can expect. Now, I'll end with one final reading from Zechariah today. And I like this one because it's a bit ambiguous. You can read this as a prophecy of Jesus' coming 2,000 years ago, or you can read this as a prophecy of Jesus coming one more time. This is Zechariah 2 again. Shout and be glad, daughter Zion, for I am coming, and I will live among you, declares the Lord. Many nations will be joined with the Lord in that day and will become my people. I will live among you, and you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me to you. Shout and be glad, right? Shout and be glad, my friends. Jesus has come, and Jesus is coming. If we can help you in any way this morning, we invite you to come forward now as we stand and as we sing.